She screamed, and the shockwave shattered every window. Light burst from her skin, metal warped, the agent collapsed. But Luke only said, "She's my daughter." What happened next will shake even the strongest. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The desert at night was a hollow drum of wind and silence, the sky stitched with satellites like dying embers from an old war. Luke Harmon stood alone on the edge of what used to be a missile test basin, his breath fogging faintly in the dry chill, the distant clang of a wind-tossed panel his only company. Every part of his life had receded into static, a man out of time, out of use. He didn't expect the sky to scream. It wasn't the sound that got him moving. It was the color. A streak of burning teal split the stars, brighter than anything he'd seen since the last skyfall in 37. His gut knew it wasn't natural. Natural didn't pulse like a heartbeat, or crash like it was morning. By the time the tremor reached his feet, Luke was already halfway to his shed. The gorge was 6 miles out, a wound in the earth where things were dumped and forgotten. He hiked fast, old joints grinding, flashlight beam bouncing across dead scrub and cracked stone. The wreckage was visible even before he cleared the last ridge. Metal twisted like muscle, steam curling skyward, a pulse of heat breaking through the cold. Military? Maybe. But even war machines didn't hum like they were alive. He stepped closer, cautiously, hand on his rusted sidearm, the flashlight catching edges of symbols not meant for Earth. Then he saw the glass dome, cracked, fogged. Inside it, movement. A child, small, shivering, pale blue skin webbed with veins that pulsed like bioluminescence, eyes wide and shining, mouth parted as if gasping through another atmosphere. Her hands were pressed against the glass. No sound, just pleading. The kind of silence that had weight to it, that wrapped around your ribs and squeezed. Luke froze. Memory slammed into him like a grenade blast, a collapsing tunnel, the roar of fire. His daughter's hand, tiny, soot-smudged, slipping from his as he was pulled into the evac shuttle. He hadn't seen her face again, just heard her cry out. The child in the pod trembled the same way. He didn't call for backup. He didn't even check the relay tower. Luke dropped to his knees beside the wreckage, pulled his glove off, and laid his hand against the dome. She mirrored him, palm to palm. That was the moment it changed. Not when the pod fell, not when he opened it. When he saw her and decided she wasn't wreckage. She was what he'd been waiting to rebuild. The cradle took 3 days to build, though Luke didn't sleep once. He scavenged the curved alloy supports from the pod's shattered frame, cutting them down to soft arcs with the precision of a man who once rewired drop pods in mid-descent. He lined the interior with scraps of heat-insulated fiber from the wreckage, softening them with solvent to avoid irritation to her skin that flushed faintly with light when she exhaled. Every weld he laid hummed with quiet obsession, a man sculpting not just a crib, but penance. He worked barehanded, ignoring the cuts, the burns, the ache in his spine. Guilt made for excellent fuel. When it was done, he stepped back and exhaled. The cradle gleamed with an alien luster, equal parts military salvage and tenderness. He carried her over and placed her inside. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But she reached up, placed one glowing hand against his face, and blinked twice, slow, deliberate, almost human. He called her Solon. His wife had whispered that word into his ear once, beneath a pressurized sky. Solon, when all this ends, we'll name our second that, light after storm. He'd forgotten how the word tasted in his mouth. Now, it hung in the bunker like an oath. Luke rewired the air filters to accommodate her breathing cycle, added trace elements to the purifier based on scans from the pod's remains. The medbot, an old model M90, more rust than logic, was cannibalized and reprogrammed, fed with scraped DNA readouts from her skin flakes and hair. Every adjustment brought her more comfort. Every fix tethered him more tightly to the living proof that he hadn't lost everything. She learned fast, frighteningly fast. Language first, basic syntax, then context. By the 5th day, she was mimicking words, drawing symbols in the dust. When she finally said it, "Da," he froze. Not dad, not father, just da, like a breath given form, like a second chance. But the outside world was beginning to stir. Signal pings bounced off his scrambler with increasing frequency. He caught snippets on ham channels. Unregistered descent. Bioform sighting. The Galactic Immigration Authority issued a bulletin. Unsanctioned arrival. High priority target. Reward listed in full credits. Local desert forums lit up with speculation. Bounty hunters whispered of heat signatures near Death Ridge. The pod's debris had glowed too long. Luke locked the hatch each night now, reinforced the seals with scrap iron and welded joints. He slept with the sidearm closer, not out of fear for himself. He'd made peace with dying long ago. But if anyone tried to take her, they'd learn just how much wreckage he was still capable of becoming. The wind outside howled across the desert like it knew what was coming. Luke heard the hum of the rover before he saw it. Military-grade axles, solar-wrapped armor plating, dust-caked but unmistakable. Not local, not lost. Purpose-built and driven by a man with a mission. Luke killed the lights, palmed the sidearm from beneath the workbench, and waited. The knock wasn't a knock at all. 3 dull thuds from a boot against the steel door, each one more entitled than the last. When Luke opened it, he didn't bother with pretense. The man outside didn't either. Marshal Ben Crowley stood with the casual authority of someone who had long since traded his conscience for clearance codes. His uniform was pressed but faded, the insignia of the Interplanetary Refugee Authority glinting under desert dust. His eyes were worse. Cold, flat, administrative, no curiosity, just extraction. "Luke Harmon," he said without introduction. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Luke didn't invite him in, but Crowley stepped through anyway, scanning the interior like a man flipping through pages he already knew the ending to. The cradle caught his eye. More specifically, the way it pulsed faintly, the metal humming in response to the life it held. He turned toward Luke, letting the silence tighten before he spoke. "Category 3 unauthorized bioform," he said, his tone clinical as if reading a grocery list. "That's 10 years on Lunacore 1, 25 if we go by code. But hey, hand her over nice and quiet and I might shave it to 5. Maybe less. I'm not without mercy." Luke's fingers itched at his side near the holster, but he didn't draw. He stepped forward instead, placing himself squarely between Crowley and the cradle. "She's not a bioform," he said. No anger, just iron. "She's my daughter." Crowley smiled, tight-lipped, amused. "That's a touching sentiment, Luke. But the law doesn't deal in metaphors. She's unprocessed, untagged, unvetted. Hell, she's probably carrying reactive genetic markers. You think they sent her here by accident?" Luke didn't blink. "You think I care?" The moment stretched like pulled wire. Crowley's hand brushed near his belt, not for his weapon, but his comm. He hadn't drawn yet, but the threat was now in the room, thick as smoke. His badge gave him power, but Luke had nothing left to lose, and men with nothing to lose are the last kind you corner. From the cradle, a soft sound broke the tension. Duh! Crowley froze. Just a fraction, but Luke saw it. That one word did what no speech or weapon could. It changed the shape of the air, and Luke knew then, this man wasn't here for justice. He was here for ownership, and that would never happen, not while Luke still breathed. The dome lit with violence before words had the chance to rot in silence. Crowley moved first, swift, trained, bureaucratic in his brutality. The plasma cuffs flared to life in his hand, glowing with promise, designed not to restrain but to subdue, to dehumanize. But Luke Harmon wasn't built for surrender. He hadn't survived the collapse of a Martian evac compound, hadn't carried bleeding men through vacuum-ruptured corridors, just to be cuffed in his own home like livestock. Luke's instincts surged. He pivoted sideways, letting Crowley's arm swing past, then closed the distance and drove his shoulder into the marshal's chest. The two crashed into the side of the cradle with a force that sent bolts rolling across the concrete floor. Crowley grunted, off balance, and Luke capitalized, grabbing the offending wrist and slamming it down hard against the polished steel rim of the cradle. Bone met alloy. The cuffs clattered from Crowley's twitching hand, hissing as they powered down on impact. Blood trickled from the edge of his palm, dark and metallic-smelling in the recycled air. Crowley reeled back, staggering, one hand cradling the other, his breath sharp and ragged. But the damage wasn't just physical. His pride had cracked too. Solon screamed, not in fear, not even in pain. It was something older, something raw and unfiltered. The scream tore through the air like a frequency never meant for Earth. Every panel along the dome's reinforced structure trembled. Glass shattered inward in 1,000 tiny shards, slicing the quiet open. The cradle pulsed in response, its metal ribs momentarily glowing with Solon's panicked energy. Luke ducked low, covering her as the last of the window panes exploded, shielding her from the storm she herself had summoned. He could feel the heat radiating off her, not from the body, but from something deeper, something cellular. She wasn't mimicking anymore. She was changing. When he rose, Crowley stood at a distance, leaning against a support beam, lip bleeding but smiling. "She's a weapon," he spat, voice full of perverse certainty. "You really think they sent her here without a reason? You're not her father, Luke. You're her test subject." Luke said nothing. Words meant nothing to men who saw only utility in innocence. He simply picked up the cuffs, dropped them at Crowley's feet, and turned to check the cradle, gently placing a hand on Solon's shoulder. She looked up at him, exhausted, terrified, but aware of what she'd done, of what she could do. And Luke, battle-hardened, soul-worn, made a silent vow. Whatever she became, it would never be what they wanted. Not their weapon, not their proof, only his daughter. The Earth core tunnels hadn't seen light in 50 years, not real light, just the humming glow of dying battery packs and bio-lanterns, smeared against concrete like the last gasp of civilization. The air down there tasted metallic, damp with the sweat of the forgotten. Luke moved with practiced purpose, boots crunching over dust and old cables, Solon wrapped close against his chest beneath a thermal shroud. Every few paces she'd shift, whisper a question that cut deeper than the silence ever could. "Duh. Am I dangerous?" Luke didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The truth clawed at his throat, but he swallowed it and said instead, "You're precious. That's why they want you." Solon nodded, small and solemn. She had the eyes of someone who'd seen war without knowing the word for it. Each day she spoke more fluidly, language coming to her not as learning, but as remembering. Like the world had once been hers, and she was relearning how to speak its name. Their guide, Rix, a wiry man with a half-melted data jack protruding from his temple, led them deeper into the understructure. He wore old mining gear and spoke only when asked, always with one eye on his biometric scanner. Luke never trusted him, but he'd run out of time, not options. Rix claimed to have safe passage past the Theta 4 checkpoint, claimed to have the right codes, the right bribes. He lied. It happened fast, too fast for instinct. Luke turned to adjust Solin's hood, and that's when Rix struck. A hiss of pressure, a sting at the base of his neck, then darkness collapsing like a trap door. The paralyzer wasn't military grade, but it didn't need to be. Luke fell to the floor in a lock of spasms, his limbs screaming, useless. He couldn't move, couldn't cry out. But his eyes stayed open just long enough to see Rix drag Solin away, struggling, calling for him, terrified. Her voice echoed down the tunnel like a blade drawn across concrete. Then, nothing. When he woke, the world was sterile. Cold metal walls, fluorescent overheads, a holding cell with no seams, and Crowley, sitting outside with a thermal cup in hand, polished boots crossed at the ankle, clean-shaven now, like the face of authority had finally washed the blood off. "She's not a child, Harmon," Crowley said, voice calm as a sermon. "She's a shell, a carrier. That's what they told me. Whatever was inside her, they've got it now. You're a footnote, a sob story in a classified report." Luke didn't respond, but beneath the silence, something in him began to burn again. Not grief, not fear, the ignition point of fury. The lock was a joke, at least to someone who once hot-wired a fusion engine with nothing but a wedding ring and a broken circuit fork. Luke pried the panel loose with his bare hands, fingers blistering, breath slow and steady. Pain was just data. He'd worked through worse. They should have known better than to trap an engineer inside a machine. The stripped data node came from the wall console. He cracked it open with his boot heel and rerouted the current with a tension coil he'd torn from the bunk's frame. One shorted pulse later, the door slid open with a shudder. The alarm stayed silent. Luke had rewired the failsafe first. They always forget about the failsafe. The hallway was glass and chrome, sterile as a morgue, humming with power but devoid of soul. He moved like a ghost through the corridors, lifting an ID chip from a passed-out tech in the med bay and masking his face behind a rebreather visor. The layout was easy to memorize. He'd read blueprints like scripture for 20 years. This place wasn't built for chaos. It was built for containment. That made it fragile. The lab door was sealed, pressure-locked, reinforced. But the bypass code was stored 3 terminals back, buried in an access cache like some rookie mistake. Luke triggered it with a double tap and stepped inside before the light had a chance to stabilize. She was there. Solin. Strapped to a gurney, wires sunk into her arms, her eyes wide and damp, her skin flushed with stress light. A panel above her head pulsed red, each line of text more damning than the last. Power extraction protocol. Active vascular discharge, 47%. Cognitive suppression, incomplete. Luke saw none of the scientists who authored the horror. Just white coats on the floor, fled or unconscious, it didn't matter. 2 guards turned, rifles rising, but Luke moved with the precision of a man who dismantled warheads under sniper fire. He dropped one with a pry bar to the throat, the other with a voltage spike from the node's live end. They never saw him coming. Solin trembled as he knelt beside her, panic etched across her features. "Am I still your daughter?" she asked, the words barely a whisper, but heavy as gravity. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out the cradle, the one he'd made from wreckage and grief and love. He laid it beside her, lifted her into it with hands gentler than any machine had known, and whispered against her hair. You were never just mine. You were always ours. And then it happened. She pulsed, not screamed, not wept, but glowed. Light poured from her skin, her chest, her eyes. The panels cracked, the conduits overloaded, every monitor blew out in a wave of static. She didn't just light up the room, she claimed it. Alarms wailed in shattered octaves as red light smeared across the corridor walls, each pulse synchronized with the dying heartbeat of the facility. Smoke spilled like liquid from ruptured vents, thick with ozone and scorched circuitry. Luke ran through it, boots slick with coolant and blood, Solon cradled against his chest like a spark pulled from the ruins. Her body was hot, her glow dimming, as if the power she unleashed had cost her more than the machines it destroyed. He didn't have time to check her vitals. Every second mattered. Every corner turned might be the last. The place was falling apart, not from an attack, but from her. Because of her. Her pulse had crashed systems built to survive asteroid strikes. And still, she clung to him, half-conscious, whispering his name. Duh. He ducked beneath a collapsed support beam, sparks dancing in his hair, lungs burning. The emergency shutters had sealed the main exits. He took the sublevels instead. An engineer always knew the skeleton beneath the skin. Service tunnels, cooling shafts, places no combat algorithm accounted for, places built for repairmen, not prisoners. By the time they reached the surface access hatch, the sky above the Mojave Dome had fractured, cracks spreading across the false blue like veins of broken glass. He pushed through the pressure seal, stepping into the cold night wind as if emerging from hell. And in a way, he had. But the fire didn't stay buried. Somehow, someone had captured it, a security feed, a stolen stream, a video smuggled to the surface like contraband, not of explosions, not of the lab in ruin, but of him, a man wrapped in soot and blood, clutching a glowing child as if she were the last good thing in the universe. No weapons, no aggression, just a cradle of steel and trembling limbs, and the word that echoed louder than any blast. Da. The vid spread in hours. Systems couldn't scrub it fast enough. People didn't recoil in fear. They roared in rage. The tags trended instantly. She called him Donat. A bioform. They cut. Children protests erupted across colony gates and Earthside news grids. The footage didn't show a fugitive. It showed a father. And the question beneath every comment thread was always the same. What kind of system punishes this? Crowley vanished. The lab shuttered under emergency tribunal order. Files were sealed. Careers evaporated. But none of it mattered to Luke. By then, he and Solon were gone, vanished into the asteroid belts under names that didn't belong to them. But before they disappeared, he left one last message in the public archives. Just 15 seconds long. Low resolution, no theatrics. Just Luke, holding Solon in the cradle, his voice steady. I built this for her, not to contain her, but to protect what they don't understand. If that's a crime, I'll wear it like a medal. Then the screen cut to black, and the world was left to decide what kind of war it had been fighting all along. The image was grainy, recorded on a salvaged holopad patched together with tape and conviction. No backdrop, no emblem, just a man and a child sitting on the edge of a cargo crate in a quiet corner of some forgotten outpost orbiting between legality and sky. The lighting flickered with power instability, but the message that followed would shake empires. Luke looked directly into the lens, not as a fugitive, not as a rebel, but as a father. They told me she was a danger, he began, voice raw with wear. They told me I was a traitor, that I was sheltering something meant to be dissected, studied, feared. A pause, heavy, deliberate. But I know what danger looks like, he continued, jaw clenched against old memory. It's not a child. It's a system that sees a child as a threat, that builds prisons before it builds understanding. Behind him, Solon sat in her cradle, older now but still small, still radiant with that quiet light she never quite lost. Her fingers played absently with a strip of solder wire, twisting it into tiny spirals. Luke turned to her gently, his voice softening. "What do you want to be, Solon?" She looked up, eyes gleaming, not with power, but purpose. "A builder," she said, "like you." Luke smiled, and in that smile was the weight of every battle he'd fought, every night spent soldering air filters by candlelight, every escape through smoke and silence. "Then we build," he said. "Not weapons, not cages, homes." The screen went black, but the words stayed lit. Within hours, the message had reached every surface sector and orbital ring. Protesters didn't just repost it, they engraved it. Walls across cities read, "Build cradles, not prisons." The phrase became a movement, then a mandate, forcing systems to reckon with the reflection they saw in Luke's eyes. The tribunal that once labeled Solon an object rewrote its protocols. The refugee authority was dismantled piece by piece. Crowley, if he still breathed, never surfaced again. Years passed. Time, as it does, buried the faces, but not the flame. At the Galactic Unity Summit, beneath the shimmer of 12 merged banners, Solon stood. Grown, composed, radiant in a way that was fully her own. Her voice filled the dome, calm but seismic. "My father didn't just save me," she said, her hand resting on the worn metal cradle beside her, preserved, revered. "He saved what it means to be human. He showed the galaxy that sometimes the strongest thing you can build is the space to be gentle." Silence followed, and then thunderous applause, not for a war won, but for a cradle kept whole.